Welcome to the CEDH Summer Slam, presented by Mayhem Comics and Collectibles. You may have noticed that we took a bit of a break last week. Well, when you see what this game devolves into, and how fast it does, you may understand why. With that being said, let's check out the pod today. First, we have Aiden on Marchesa Mad Farm, a Mardu list that seeks to use Marchesa for card advantage and assemble an Underworld Breach or Bomberman line. Craft on Tivit Cellar of Sieves, an Esper deck that seeks to control the board, land its commander, accrue value, and win with Time Sieve. Jack on Keskit Kydele Hulk Staff, a Protean Hulk deck that seeks to cheat out Hulk, sacrifice it to Keskit, and win through a pile. And finally, Tanner on Greasefang Stacks, a stacks list that seeks to slow down the board and use Greasefang to reanimate a big vehicle. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let's continue the CEDH Summer Slam. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Aiden draws and plays a Badlands for turn. They play a Lion's Eye Diamond and pass. Craft draws and pays 2 life to cast Gataxian Probe. He looks at Tanner's hand and draws. He plays a Bloodstained Mire and passes. Jack draws, plays a Verdant Catacombs, and passes. Tanner draws and plays an Arid Mesa, cracking it, paying a life. In response, Jack cracks his Verdant Catacombs, paying a life and fetching up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Tanner fetches up a Scrubland and casts Enlightened Tutor. In response, Craft cracks his Bloodstained Mire, paying a life and fetching up an Underground Sea of his own. Tanner fetches up a Mana Crypt onto the top of his library and passes. Aiden draws and plays a Flooded String, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. They play a Dothy Voidwalker. At the end of Aiden's turn, Craft casts Vampiric Tutor, fetching up a card onto the top of his library and losing 2 life. The turn moves to Craft. Craft draws, plays a City of Brass, and plays a Phantasmal Image, entering as a copy of Dothy Voidwalker. Craft passes. Jack draws and plays a Forest. He casts a Blood Pet and passes. Tanner draws, plays a Mana Crypt, and plays a Rule of Law, much to the groan of the table, and passes. Aiden draws, plays a Spectator Seating, and casts Demonic Tutor, fetching up a card into their hand. They move to combat and attack Tanner with Dothy. Tanner takes the hit, and Aiden passes. Craft draws, plays a Jeweled Lotus, and moves to combat, attacking Jack with Dothy. Jack takes the hit, and at the end of Craft's turn, Jack casts Worldly Tutor, fetching up a Dothy Voidwalker of his own onto the top of his library. The turn moves to Jack. Jack draws and plays an Urza's Saga. It enters and moves to Chapter 1. He sacrifices Blood Pet to help cast Dothy Voidwalker and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, casts a Dranith Magistrate, and passes. Aiden draws and plays a City of Brass. They play a Timna the Weaver and move to combat, attacking Tanner with Dothy. Tanner takes the hit, and in their second main phase, Aiden draws a card and loses a life through Timna. Aiden passes. Craft draws and casts Expedition Map. In response, Jack pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Expedition Map. Craft moves to combat and attacks Jack with Dothy. Jack takes the hit, and Craft passes. Jack draws and Urza Saga and moves to Chapter 2. He moves to combat and attacks Tanner with Dothy. Tanner takes the hit, and Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays a Silent Clearing, and casts Uba Mask. In response, Aiden casts Lightning Bolt, destroying Dranith Magistrate. With a miserable editing situation ahead, Tanner passes. Aiden exiles Cabal Ritual and plays a Windswept Heath. They cast their commander, Queen Marchesa, and become the Monarch. They move to combat and attack Tanner with Marchesa and Craft with Timna. Both take the hits, and in their second main phase, Aiden pays 2 life to exile the top 2 cards of their library. Aiden exiles Auriok Salvagers through the Monarchy and passes. Craft exiles Rest in Peace and passes. At the end of Craft's turn, Jack activates Urza Saga, creating a Construct token. The turn moves to Jack. Jack exiles Fyndhorn Elves and Urza Saga moves to Chapter 3. In response, Jack creates a Construct token and fetches up a Jeweled Lotus onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Keskit, the Flesh Sculptor, and moves to combat, attacking Tanner with Dothy and Craft with the Construct. Both take the hits, and Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and plays Bright Climb Pathway. He overloads Damn. In response, Aiden sacrifices Dothy, choosing and casting Worldly Tutor, fetching up a Cathar Commando onto the top of their library. Still in response, Craft casts Swan Song, countering Damn and giving Tanner a 2/2 bird token. Tanner passes. Aiden exiles and moves to combat, attacking Tanner with Marchesa and Craft with Timna. Both take the hits, and in their second main phase, Aiden exiles 2 cards and loses 2 life through Timna. They overload a Dam of their own, destroying all creatures. Aiden exiles through the Monarchy and passes. Craft exiles and casts Dress Down, exiling Underground River when it enters. He plays Underground River, Dress Down sacrifices at the end step, and Craft passes. Jack exiles and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and plays a Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Tanner passes. Aiden exiles and casts Peer into the Abyss, targeting Craft, who exiles half his library and loses half his life. Aiden exiles through the Monarchy and passes. Craft exiles and plays Polluted Delta, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Hollowed Fountain into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Tivit, Seller of Secrets. It enters and Craft votes for Evidence and Bribery, while the table votes for Evidence, with Craft creating 4 Clue tokens and 1 Treasure token. Craft passes. Jack exiles and casts Vampiric Tutor, fetching up a card onto the top of his library, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and plays Linvala, Keeper of Silence, and moves to combat, attacking Jack with Thalia. Jack takes the hit, and Tanner passes. Aiden exiles and plays Urza Saga. It enters and moves to Chapter 1. They recast their commander, Queen Marchesa, and move to combat, attacking Jack with Marchesa. Jack takes the hit, Aiden exiles through the Monarchy, and passes. Craft exiles and plays a Morphic Pool. He moves to combat, attacking Tanner with Tivit. Tanner blocks with Linvala, and in his second main phase, Craft cracks a clue, exiling and casting Spellseeker, fetching up a March of Swirling Mist into his hand, and passes. Jack exiles and casts Mana Crypt, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and cracks Silent Clearing, exiling and playing Caves of Coilless. He casts a Smuggler's Copter, and passes. Aiden exiles and Urza Saga moves to Chapter 2. They move to combat and attack Craft with Marchesa. Craft chumps with Spellseeker, Aiden exiles through the Monarch, and passes. Craft exiles and moves to combat, attacking Jack with Tivit. Jack takes the hit, Craft votes for Bribery twice, and the table all vote Evidence, with Craft creating 2 Treasure tokens and 3 Clue tokens. In his second main phase, Craft casts Transmute Artifact. In response, Jack casts Pact of Negation, countering Transmute. Realizing Jack took the easy way out, Craft passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Jack loses his Mana Crypt trigger, cannot pay for his Pact, and dies. Phases pass and the turn moves to Tanner. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and plays Isolated Chapel. He crews Smuggler's Copter and moves to combat, attacking Craft with the Copter. Craft takes the hit and Tanner exiles Search for Glory. In his second main phase, Tanner casts Search for Glory, fetching up a Yawgmoth Thran Physician into his hand. At the end of Tanner's turn, Aiden activates Urza Saga, creating a Construct token. The turn moves to Aiden. Aiden exiles and Urza Saga moves to Chapter 3. In response, Aiden activates Saga, creating another Construct token and fetches up a Soul Ring onto the battlefield. They cast Flame Scroll Celebrant and move to combat, attacking Craft with Marchesa and a Construct token. In response, Craft exiles a blue card from his hand to help cast March of Swirling Mist, phasing out Marchesa, Celebrant, and a Construct. Aiden exiles through the Monarch and passes. Craft exiles and cracks 2 clues, exiling the top 2 cards of his library. He casts Esper Sentinel and moves to combat, attacking Tanner with Tivit. Tanner takes the hit, Craft votes Bribery twice, and the table votes Evidence, with Craft creating 2 treasures and 2 clues. Craft passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and casts Yawgmoth, Grand Physician, crews Smuggler's Copter, moves to combat, and attacks Craft with the Copter. In response, Craft cracks a Clue token, exiling the top card of his library. Craft takes the hit, and Tanner exiles the top card. In his second main phase, Tanner plays Command Tower and activates Yawgmoth, paying a life and sacrificing Copter to put a -1/-1 counter on Esper Sentinel and exiling the top card. Tanner passed. Before untap, Aiden's creatures phase back in. They exile and cast Grim Monolith. They move to combat and attack Craft with the Constructs and Celebrant. Craft takes the hit and dies. Aiden exiles to the Monarch and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He exiles and, with no way to deal with Aiden's board, sees the writing on the wall, activates Yawgmoth, pays a life and sacrifices Thalia, dies, and Aiden wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics in Ames this week and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won? Answer correctly and get 10% off your purchase.
I wasn't expecting to win that game, like, at all, even close going into it, but, you know, it was an interesting game. Yeah, it was really funny how the monarchy just became a detriment instead of a benefit, but yeah, it was a decently fun game.
So listen, I got stuck on 2 lands. Well, I was on 3 lands, and then one of them sacrificed itself to go get a Jeweled Lotus. Probably suboptimal. I really wasn't expecting the first dam. Craft saved me. That was very cool. I wasn't expecting the second dam. And at that point, I was pretty out of the game. I decided that when Craft went for the win, I might as well just pact, stop Craft from getting any more points since his team's in first, and just pray that my teammate can actually win a game.
hand was a little weird, but it was like fine if I drew another 2-mana rock or a land, and I just didn't get there fast enough and died.
Opinions on Uberman?
It's a bad card.
All right, after this game, we have Fish Feeders and Harmless Offerings tied up at 160 points, with Viva la Revolucion trailing by just 30 after the win for Mid. Cringe Copters just can't seem to get it together and slip back into last at 100 points. With the top neck and neck, who will pull ahead? Find out next time on the CEDH Summer Slam.